Well, hello everyone, and on behalf of the Transportation Learning Network, or TLN, welcome to today's presentation. This presentation is brought to you by the Transportation Learning Network, again, or TLN, and the Commercial Vehicle Safety Center. Both programs are a program at Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute at North Dakota State University. TLN is a program of the 4 state DOTs of North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming, and the Mountain Plains Consortium, which includes 8 universities in Colorado, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. Brenda's going to give more information about the Commercial Vehicle Safety Center next, and we're very grateful and proud of this partnership and look forward to today's presentation. With that, Brenda, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you so that you can introduce the rest of the program. Brenda is our Associate Director at UGPTI and the Program Director for the Commercial Vehicle Safety Center.
Great, thanks Chris, and greetings to everyone. It's great to see so many attendees on the meeting again today, and thank you for taking the time to join us. And thanks as well to our speakers for today, Josh Jones and Rich Clementi. And thanks Chris and all the other staff of the Transportation Learning Network for your help in coordinating this meeting. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration for the grant funding that makes our work and these webinars possible. As Chris mentioned, I'm Brenda Lance, the Associate Director for the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute at North Dakota State University, as well as the Program Director for our Commercial Vehicle Safety Center. And the webinar today is going to provide an update regarding the entry-level driver training regulations and the training provider registry. And suggestions for future topics are always welcome. So if anything comes to mind, either during this webinar or later time, feel free to contact me with that idea and we can look into hosting a webinar for that. As Chris mentioned, as we proceed, feel free to use that chat box to type in any questions as they come up, and we'll do that question and answer discussion after the presentations. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Josh Jones is a transportation specialist with FMCSA's Commercial Driver's License Division, and Richard Clementi is a transportation specialist with the FMCSA Driver and Carrier Operations Division. I'll turn it over to you both to get us started.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And welcome everyone. I'm Joshua Jones with FMCSA's CDL division. I'm the project or program lead for ELDT and the TPR. Just want to say real quick that Rich and I really appreciate this opportunity to present today. We both believe that it's a great platform to help educate and share information on the regulations in the program. But we do have a lot to cover today, so with that, we'll go ahead and jump right into it. Let's see. Here we go. So we'll cover today's agenda. First, we'll talk about the ELDT final rule. What does it require of CDL applicants, training providers, and states? We'll move forward with the driver applicant or driver requirements. What do the ELDT regulations require of entry-level drivers? We'll speak about training requirements, which trainings are entry-level drivers required to complete, and then also the training provider requirements. What do the ELDT regulations require of the providers? We'll also touch on the training provider registry, or the TPR. Once it's operational, how will drivers, training providers, and states be required to use it? And then we'll also talk about sort of a countdown to ELDT, what should be done today to prepare for February 7th, 2022, the compliance date for the ELDT regulations. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rich to talk about the ELDT rule. Rich?
Josh, thank you very much. I echo your sentiments about this being a great platform to get the word out about entry-level driver training. Thank you, Brenda and Chris, for inviting us today and all of those in attendance. Just briefly about myself, as Brenda mentioned, I've now been with the agency for 16 years in the Driver and Carrier Operations Division. Prior to that, I worked in industry with the American Trucking Associations and the Truckload Carriers Association, to name a couple. It seems in most of my career, which now spans over 30 years, I'm adverse to admit, I've been involved with the entry-level driver training rule for a long time, and it has been around for a long time, even though we're coming down the stretch here. I did want to touch on the history of how we got to where we are today with the rule, because I think it's important and kind of lays the groundwork for everything Josh and I are going to talk about today. Believe it or not, the original model curriculum, which is the framework for what the curriculum is in the entry-level rule, was developed back in the mid-1980s with the then Federal Highway Administration. There wasn't even an FMCSA at the time. It didn't even come into being until the year 2000. So the model curriculum was developed back in the mid-80s, and a number of years passed. There was no training rule. We had some unsuccessful attempts back, I believe, in 2007. We tried to push a rule through, and it got published, but then it never saw the light of day. So there were several unsuccessful attempts. Ultimately, in the MAP 21, which was the prior highway bill, the Moving Ahead for Progress for the 21st Century, in Section 32304, Congress told FMCSA that we needed to develop and publish a final rule on entry-level driver training. You know, that all these years had gone by and there was no training rule. So differently than we normally, normally we will develop rules in-house, with the staff, all of our staff in FMCSA. This one was developed differently. We did what was called a negotiated rulemaking. And what a negotiated rulemaking is that the rule was developed by 26 different stakeholders in the industry, people like OIDA, ATA, truck groups, bus groups, safety groups, state reps, AMVA, all these different organizations. And we basically, in 6 two-day sessions, put together the framework of the rule that we're going to talk about today. And it was an agreed upon rule, or proposal, I guess I should say at that time, which was the framework for what we're going to talk about today. We still had to go through notice and comment like we always do. We still had to do a cost-benefit analysis on the proposal to make sure it met the cost-benefit analysis. But ultimately, it led to the publication of and it doesn't say it on the slide, but it was on December 8th, 2016, as again mandated by MAP 21. So December 8, 2016 is the day that the rule was published. And again, it set the federal minimum standard for the mandatory training of entry-level drivers. And also, we're going to talk about this a lot. The states may have requirements that exceed the federal requirements, and we'll get into that. But the federal requirement is a minimum standard. So that rule was published back in 2016. I always say it's the best resource for, even with everything Josh and I are going to say today, that's the best resource for looking at, all the curriculums in there, all of the qualifications for registering on the TPR. Everything is in the rules. So that's really the best resource, although, we're going to cover as much as we can today. The compliance date for the rule, as Josh mentioned, is coming right around the corner. It's February 7th of 2022. The rule also established the need for the training provider registry, which is the IT system whereby everybody's going to be registering and already has started registering to be a provider. And that's where all of the proof of training is going to be housed as well. So we'll get into a lot of that, but that's basically the framework of of how we got to the entry-level rule. Next slide, please. Key point about the rule, and there are several. This slide talks about who is subject to the entry-level driver training standards that take effect. It is not for existing drivers that are individuals that have CDLs. It is for people that are going to be applying for either a Class A or a Class B CDL or an upgrade from a B to an A or any of the 3 endorsements on the slide, either a hazmat, a passenger, or school bus endorsement, key thing being for the first time. So if somebody has a CDL years ago, it expired, they're not subject to this rule. It's only for new CDLs, upgrades, and the endorsements. The other key point on this slide is at the bottom that we didn't change any of the applicability requirements in 383.3 of the CDL regulations, specifically sections C, D, and H. There are a number of different types of operations that are already exempted per Part 383. That's military, farmers, firefighters, emergency response, vehicles, drivers removing snow and ice. We didn't change any of those. They are still exempt from taking the skills test. But the ones that are subject are the ones that I mentioned on the slide. Next slide, please. Okay, as it relates to commercial learner's permits, anybody that has a commercial learner's permit and the driver gets that when they pass their knowledge test, they are not subject to this rule either if they get it before February 7, 2022, or before their CLP expires. There's a 180-day extension on the CLP. So as long as they get it before the February 7th, 2022 date or before it expires, they are not subject to entry-level driver training. So that's basically what this slide says. They are not included as subject to the training requirements. Next slide, please. Okay, Josh mentioned that we were going to cover the training, and this is very important, the training that's required by the rule. It's basically broken into two parts, which are on the slide here, the theory training, which is the classroom training, and then the behind the wheel, which is range and public road training, both. There are two segments of that. We're going to mention this a couple of times, but the range or the public road training has to be done by the same provider, but the classroom and the behind the wheel can be done by separate providers, although each one of them would have to register separately. Remember that the range and road has to be done by the same provider. The theory can be done by another provider. As it relates to the theory training, the simulators can be used, online training, computer-based lectures and things like that can be used. There are no minimum number of hours in either the classroom or the behind the wheel training, no required minimum number of hours. However, on the theory training, an individual must score at least 80% on an assessment of all training topics in the theory curricula. And as I mentioned earlier, that curricula, the AB and all the endorsements is all in the 2016 final rule, chapter and verse. On the slide there are 5 main training topics that are covered in the theory, the basic operations, safe operating procedures, and so on. They're all on the slide there. There are a number of subtopics under all of those topics, which gets into that 80% assessment. So all of the different areas must be covered, and a written assessment must be done before the proof of the theory training can be sent into the TPR, and Josh will be getting into that. So again, there are, I don't know how many, but there are a number of topics under all of those headers. As it relates to the behind the wheel training, again, this is the actual operation of a commercial motor vehicle, and it takes place on a range or a public road. Key point here is that a simulator cannot be used for meeting the requirements of behind the wheel training. It can be used for the theory, not for the behind the wheel. Once again, there are no minimum number of hours required. The training provider must determine the driver's proficiency in all of the training areas in the curricula. Josh and I have gotten a number of questions on what proficiency means. It's not defined in the 2016 final rule. However, we like to think of it, it's not somebody doing a skill, one and done, and then you'd say they've mastered it. It has to be a consistent demonstration of the basic vehicle control skills and the mastery of the basic maneuvers for determining proficiency. Some people may take less hours than others, as all individuals learn at different speeds. So again, no minimum number of hours, enough time to determine the proficiency, the driver's proficiency on all of these areas of training. Next slide, please. Okay, and I kind of always jump ahead or get ahead of myself. For the behind the wheel public road, the instructor must cover all topics listed and determine and document that each driver trainee has demonstrated proficiency in all elements of the behind the wheel curriculum unless otherwise noted. And those are in appendices A and B of part 380 of the final rule. I mentioned the issue of test outs. It's not a one and done. They must demonstrate the skill no matter how long it takes for all of the skills listed. And again, it's all tied back to that model curriculum, all of the different elements from going back to the mid-1980s when it was originally developed. So it's been hashed out for a long time, obviously. So next slide, please. Okay, as I mentioned, the theory and the behind the wheel training can be delivered by different providers. Important to note that both of them must be registered and listed on the training provider registry. And both training providers would submit the driver training information to FMCSA to the training provider registry. Important to note, then Josh is going to talk a lot about this, all transactions involving the TPR, everything is electronic. There are no paper transactions. The TPR is kind of the gatekeeper of all of the information. the proof of training, and everyone that's certified to be that's self-certified to be a training provider. So it's all housed in the TPR. As I said, the behind the wheel range and public road must be provided by the same training provider. I can't stress that enough. Next slide, please. Okay, on this slide, we basically wanted to just show different types of training providers, and I think a lot of these types that are on the slide have already registered, or different training schools. It can be motor carriers, it can be state or local governments, they're owner operators. A one man or one woman training shop can register to be a training provider. There are no limits, either high or low, on how many people can be a certified training provider. I'm going to get into some of the slides here in a minute about what it takes or what somebody needs to meet to self-certify to get on the TPR. So, but these are just some examples of different types of training providers that are out there. So, next slide, please. Okay, very importantly, beginning February 7, 2022, as Josh mentioned, training providers who wish to provide ELDT must register and self-certify. They are self-certifying under penalty of perjury that they meet all of the FMCSA and any state requirements that apply. And these are the 5 real key areas on the slide that they are certifying to. That is the curricula, the facilities that are used, the instructors. There are parts of the rule which talk about qualifications for theory and behind the wheel instructors, 2 years having a CDL and experience, any state licensing, as I mentioned, and also that any vehicle requirements as well. All of these they start in part 380.703 of the 2016 rule, and then it goes on from there. The facilities, the instructors, the vehicles, and any state requirements are all covered in the subsequent sections in part 380 after 380.703. So it spells out in chapter and verse what a training provider has to meet to get on the list that Josh is going to be talking about. We I don't believe that we, and Josh can correct me if I'm wrong later, we are not vetting training providers that are registering to get on the list now, but once February 7, 2022 comes, if you self-certify that you meet the requirements and then the school isn't meeting those requirements, the agency can come out and do an audit, and I'll get into a little bit of that here in a minute. So next slide, please. Okay, as I said, beginning February 7, 2022, after a driver successfully completes the required training that I discussed, the provider must electronically submit the proof of training to the TPR, and it must be submitted by midnight of the second business day after the driver completes the training. So that proof of training has to be sent after Feb 7, 2022 into the TPR, once again, electronically. Everything's electronic. Next slide, please. Okay, a couple of other things I wanted to mention before Josh gets into the TPR. These are not in the slides. I mentioned already that providers can be removed from the registry either voluntarily or involuntarily if not meeting those self-certification standards. They can challenge if they were involuntarily removed. There are procedures in the rule for a school or a training provider challenging the ruling. The requirements for continued listing on the TPR are also in the rule, and those are in section 380.719. For example, providers have to do biennial updates and update key information in the TPR. So those are a couple of other points I wanted to make that are in the rule. I tried to cover the main parts of the rule and who's subject and that kind of thing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Josh.
Excellent. Thanks, Rich. Can you hear me all right? I think so.
I can, yes.
All right, perfect. Just want to always double check, before continuing on. Moving on here, going to jump into the TPR, the Training Provider Registry. The Training Provider Registry it's a web system that will help CDL applicants essentially connect with training providers who are self-certified to provide the required entry-level driver training. The registry will contain the list of entry-level driver training providers, all those entities that Rich mentioned, including public and private CDL training programs, fleet-operated CDL programs, all of those. So basically all those entities that register with FMCSA and self-certify that they meet the requirements for providing the training. It will also retain a record of the drivers that have successfully completed ELDT. That certification information that training providers submit to the TPR will live in the TPR, and the state driver's licensing agencies, or the SDLAs, will use the TPR to verify a driver has successfully completed ELDT. So again, the TPR will be the house that the database that houses all that information, and again, what the states will use to verify if ELDT has been completed. Moving forward here, just sort of to tie all of this together, the rule, the system, everything, I'm going to walk through how the training provider registry supports ELDT. So a quick overview of how, that driver's training certification information gets to the TPR and what happens to it. So first, drivers, they will use the list on the TPR website to select their training provider or providers, and they'll work with the training provider or providers to complete the ELDT. Once that driver has successfully completed the ELDT training, the training provider will electronically submit the certification information to the registry, certifying the driver has met the requirements. And as Rich mentioned, this must be done for each student that completes a course and must be done by midnight of the second business day after that. So again, it's all electronic. There won't be any paper certifications or anything like that. The training provider will be submitting the data via electronic format into the TPR. From there, FMCSA will retain the driver training certification information in the registry. And that, it's not noted in our presentation, but basically that ELDT certification will be captured or retained for the lifespan of the driver. We're looking at, it'll be like 55 years in the system. So pretty much the life of the driver. So a one and done type of thing with ELDT. And then before a CDL applicant subject to the ELDT regulations is administered the relevant skills test or the knowledge test for the hazmat endorsement, the SDLA or the skills examiner will use their own IT system or an IT system to retrieve the driver's data from the TPR and verify that the applicant meets the federal minimum requirements. In other words, the state will send a message or ping the TPR to pull the information to their system and verify the LDT has been met. So that's a sort of a walkthrough of how it all ties together. And then because, the information is coming from the training provider registry and only registered training providers can submit driver data into the system, the retrieval confirms that the driver completed their training with a registered provider. And again, that's a big piece here is that only registered providers can submit the information to the TPR. So that's a walkthrough of how, again, the TPR supports the LDT and how that system, or how that information flows through the system. Moving forward here, I think I went one too many. 1 second, there we go. So, I'll talk about how training providers register. Registration opened up back in June of 2021. And in order to register, training providers will need to visit the TPR. There are 3 steps to begin the registration. And the first step is visiting the registry, the TPR. Training providers will create a login.gov account. or use an existing login.gov account and basically use their username and password to access the TPR. From there, they'll register as a training provider. Providers will select one person to register the training provider with FMCSA, so one representative to complete that initial registration. And then once approved, the user can invite other users or individuals to the registry and work in the TPR on behalf of the training provider. So I could register as an administrator and then invite Rich to my account if he's one of my instructors that will be submitting the ELDT certification information to the TPR. After initial issuance or initial registration rather is approved, training providers can begin listing their location-specific information. So in other words, providers log in to register their actual training locations. For example, if your business is located in one area but training is happening in another, providers will need to register where the training actually takes place. And if you have multiple, or if training providers have multiple locations, each of those locations must be registered. And then last couple points here on this slide, again, training providers must self-certify. They meet all applicable federal and state requirements. That self-certification of meeting ELDT requirements may occur at a training provider level or at the location level. And what that means is if that self-certification happens at the training provider level, it's applicable to all the locations under the umbrella of the training provider. However, it may need to happen at the location level, say if the training provider has a location in Virginia, but also a location in Maryland. They would need to register or self-certify at the location level because the states may have different requirements that they must meet. We have additional instructions and we'll continue to have additional instructions as we move forward and approach the compliance state. We have the training provider registration guide linked on the slide here. We also have a how-to video currently up on our website. So we definitely encourage people to visit the TPR often as we're continually updating the information and materials that are available. But that's a walkthrough of how training providers will register. And moving forward, one too many again here, how will they submit driver data? Beginning February 7th, 2022, the registered providers will log into the TPR and start the process to enter driver training certification information. Essentially, they'll be entering the information into data fields in the TPR, basically an electronic quote-unquote form. And similar to the registration process, additional instructions will be available closer to implementation. We'll have a resource material or how-tos for this type of stuff. And then also note as an optional method, training providers can also submit data via the TPR web service. It's optional to transfer via the TPR web service. So it's something that training providers would want to consider in the event that you plan to transfer large amounts of data at one time. But in order to do so, you would have to have your own IT system. So a training provider, if you're interested in this, you have to have your own IT system connect to FMCSA's IT system to be able to make that interface and transfer those that large amount of data at one time. For more information on that, we have a developer toolkit page on the TPR website. It's linked on the slide here, but highly recommend checking that out if that's something you may choose to do. All right, moving forward here, as I mentioned, the countdown and to ELDT is on. February 7th is right around the corner. Training providers will need to ensure that they meet all applicable training provider requirements by the compliance date or even before then, because in order to register on the TPR, you have to self-certify you're meeting all the requirements. So if training providers haven't already done so, you want to review all those requirements. As mentioned earlier, this includes the curricula, facilities, instructor requirements, state licensing, and vehicle requirements. And for the full list of requirements or all the details, see 49 CFR Part 380. Also, again, training providers just need to determine how you'll submit driver data to FMCSA. If you're using a web service, you'll need to set up a web interface between your IT system and the TPR. And that's also true for SDLAs, depending on how they retrieve the information from the TPR. They'll need to either establish a web interface between the state system and the TPR, or utilize AMVA's solution that they have out available for testing at this time. Moving forward here, this is our last slide, so we'll have plenty of time for questions, but a great way to stay tuned and get additional information about ELDT and the TPR is just to check our website, the training provider website. We encourage you all to sign up for emails to get the latest information about resources, webinars that we're hosting, and TPR related releases, such as when we're opening or when we opened registration, when we're adding new materials to the website, things like that. And as always, you can contact us on at the information provided on the slide. But with that, I think it concludes the presentation piece of it. And we've got plenty of time for Q&A. So I'll turn it over to Brenda.
Great. Thanks a lot, Josh. Appreciate all that great information, both from you and Rich. Chris, did you want to go through the questions, or would you like me to start off?
Well, let me just check my email, because I know Shannon was going to send it to me. So here we go. I've got them.
All right.
Okay, so Rich, you had mentioned earlier about the possibility of coming in and conducting audits. So who would be conducting these audits?
Chris, that would be the, and I want to get Josh's take on this as well, but it would be representatives or from our field staff or in headquarters within FMCSA. I compare it kind of to a, we go out and do audits, compliance reviews of motor carriers, checking their, compliance with all the other rules, hours of service and everything else. I think it would be something similar to that, checking documentation requirements and things like that. We do get this question a lot, and I want to throw it to Josh, but I don't believe we've worked out the exact procedures of how all of that is going to work right now, but it certainly is on our plate.
Right, Rich, yeah, essentially spot on. And I would also add that, states also have a requirement that they must notify FMCSA if a training provider does not meet state requirements. So that isn't saying that a state must go out and do audits, but a lot of states already have a process in place for that. So based upon their procedures, they'll also be notifying FMCSA. So it could be a state doing an audit, or they could be passing along the information to FMCSA, and FMCSA works with the division and the state to conduct audits.
Chris, let me add one thing to what Josh said real quick. We could be receiving, we being FMCSA, complaints from other schools and things like that, or calls. What I've heard from the training schools, a lot of them are, policing your own kind of thing. So if somebody thinks, a school or thinks that somebody else isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing, we probably will get some calls about that.
Okay. So then as an investigator, is it safe to assume that any driver who receives their CDL on or after February 2nd of 22, they have completed the ELDT? And if not, how do we as state partners check that?
You want to start with that one, Josh, or?
Yeah. And I just want to make sure that I understand the question. And you're basically, is it the investigator at roadside? Is that what I'm hearing?
Sharon, I'm going to need you to go ahead and let's see, I'm going to turn on, let's go ahead and open it up. So let's do this. You are able to unmute yourselves. So Sharon, if
I'm
you
here.
want to.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So as a compliance specialist, when we're doing a compliance review, how would we check? Should we assume that they have had the training if they've received a CDL after that implementation date? And if not, is this database going to be something that we are going to have access to?
Gotcha. Thanks, Sharon. And Sharon, just another maybe one or two follow-up questions. When you do when you say compliance review, are you reviewing the state processes or a review of the driver? What does this review consist of?
We're doing an investigation into the motor carrier. So we're looking at individual driver qualifications.
Gotcha. So, the requirement lives at the state. They must verify that the entry-level driver has completed the applicable or required training, before they can move on to conducting the skills test or knowledge test or even issuing that CDL. So my take would be, that wouldn't be a part of the type of investigation that you're doing, and would rather fall under an annual program review that the CDL division does of the state's procedures.
Or Sharon, what I will add is that anybody that gets a CDL after that Feb 7, 2022 date, as Josh said, the assumption should be that they didn't get it unless they had completed the training.
And and then I think there was another part of your question asking if you would have access to the information. Not directly. I mean, maybe there's a time where you may need it and we could provide it, but generally speaking, no, you wouldn't have that information.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next question. As an instructor for the state of Nevada, depending on how you say it and where you're from, right? There are those of us that not only do training, but are also third-party certifiers for the Department of Motor Vehicles. How will these training requirements affect us in our requirements to provide examinations to new CMV applicants? It is my understanding that as a certifier, I must either train or give the exam, but not both.
Right, and just to clarify, a certifier, is that a skills test examiner? Is that what's meant by that term?
Stephen, if you want to either unmute and verify, or if you want to just type it in the chat.
Yeah, I've got it unmuted. So working for Department of Transportation as instructors here, we have the opportunity to be the third-party certifier to conduct those examinations, yes.
Gotcha. Thanks for the clarification. Right now, generally, yes, that is prohibited under 383. I think there is a caveat to this question that we'll need to follow up on, because say if you as the training provider provides ELDT, but then there's someone else under your umbrella or under your organization that wishes to provide the examination, that may be the exception to the question. So again, Stephen, if you were the training provider, but then say Rich was also working for the same company, but he's the examiner, that would be the one piece we will need to follow up on to let you know whether or not that's acceptable.
Thank you.
Brenda, maybe you could send us that one as a follow-up?
Yeah.
I can send these all to you when we're done at the end of the day today. So I can send them all so you can do some follow-up if you wish to.
Thank you.
Excellent.
And just as anything else with things that change, some of us may or may not be ready for change. So are the states ready for this? And if they are or are not, if there's a question, will there possibly be a delay or a pushback, maybe a grace period after this start date?
I can start with that, and then I'll turn it over to Josh. And Chris, we get this question a lot. There is no intention whatsoever for this rule to be delayed any further past February 7, 2022. It's been delayed before. What I like to say is there's been a lot of watchful eyes on it from Congress, from the motor carriers, from the training schools. It's under a lot of watchful eyes. So there are no intentions to delay it, even though that word seems to get around a lot. I want to turn it over to Josh, though, with the state implications.
Right. And I would just add to that, like Rich said, there's no intentions, but if Congress told us to do something, we would have to follow it. But otherwise, there's no intention to delay the LDT. As far as, states' progress and things like that, we've heard a lot of states have made great progress. AMVA, with their solution for connecting to the TPR through their systems, which is the CDL skills test system, or their other system, which is Rooster, and I'm not going to remember what that stands for, but basically all states would have access to that system to check the ELDT results. So that is moving along quickly, and they released their testing services a few weeks ago. So a lot of progress and great progress made there. And then states are also connecting directly to the TPR service, which they've been reaching out to us. We've been supporting them. They've been able to establish connectivity and things like that. But overall, I personally am confident in that, and states will be ready.
Okay. Let me pull this back up here. All right, next question. Some companies want their drivers to use their own truck tractors. Will they be able to do that, or does this need to be only the organization or the company's trucks?
I saw that one pop up and I researched the rule, which I have in front of me. It basically just says all vehicles used in the behind the wheel training must comply with applicable federal and state safety requirements. And the training vehicles must be in the same group and type that driver trainees intend to operate for their CDL skills test. That's it. That's in 380.711 of the rule.
Okay. Once you are a training provider, do you have to provide trainings to public, or can you just train your employees? So once you're listed, I noticed you have to register online and have that out there. So can others come to you for this training, or can you be exclusive?
Yeah, so as a part of the registration process, training providers have the choice to opt into or opt out of whether or not they're a public or private training provider. So again, during that process, you could select whether or not you want to offer just your ELDT program to anyone and everyone, or opt into being a private training provider, which would limit the amount of information on the TPR, and the general public wouldn't be able to contact.
Okay. Once a driver begins their behind the wheel training, are they required to be pre-employment drug tested and placed in a random pool?
Yeah, so
go ahead, Josh, you start.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I don't think the ELDT regulations really change any of the existing requirements or the drug and alcohol clearinghouse requirements. But I would say I think it would be best for us to take this one offline, follow up with that team of experts to get back to you. Rich, unless, I don't know if you know the answer off.
No, you're spot on, Josh. And I know there's been an answer on that, but I can't quote it chapter and verse off the top of my head. So if they could send us to, we'll get it to them after the webinar.
Okay, and then I'm gonna skip over a couple questions here and then get this one addressed right away. How does this impact me as a state employee? I have a CDL. I'm an equipment operator. So how does this impact the highway department workers?
The key thing I heard out of that was he already has a CDL, so he's not subject to the rule.
Right, and the only caveat there would be is if you're trying to obtain a CDL you don't have or an endorsement you don't have. So if you have a Class B CDL and then after February 7th, 2022 rolls around, you want to add a passenger endorsement to that CDL, an endorsement you've never had, you would need to go through ELDT.
Spot on, Josh. That's right.
Okay. Who should register if there are multiple departments as part of a local government entity? So does each department separately, or should they fall under the umbrella of that local entity as the main TPR?
Yeah, we get this one a lot too. And really it kind of depends on how you want it to work. The TPR is flexible to accommodate either or, but there have been companies out there that have reached out to us with similar question. And if, there's an overarching organization or agency that wants to essentially control or be the administrator of the account in the TPR, they can certainly do so and coordinate with your other agencies to ensure that those other agencies are registering locations under that account, or, each individual agency could register and do their own thing. Again, it's really however works best for you all, and the TPR is able to allow either or. Rich, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
No, you covered it perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to put something into the chat that will hopefully address a couple of the questions that are next in line here. And that is providing the link to the video on the training provider registration guide. And then there's another one as far as, can we get a list of data needed to enter the trainee into the TPR for approval once training is completed? Josh, does that guide and resource include that information as well?
So the guide, two things. So the registration guide does not go into the ELDT certification information that's uploaded. But that information is in regulation. It talks about needing to provide the driver's name, CLP or CDL number, driver's license number, the number of hours for behind the wheel, the assessment score for theory. So that information is in regulation. We also have, I believe, an FAQ on our page that addresses that question, but it is not in the registration guide. And I also mentioned a registration tutorial video, which we could provide the link later if needed. Was not on the slide that I spoke to.
Is there any chance you could pop that into the chat while we're going through these?
Yeah, I've tried to multitask here and hopefully not get too distracted.
All right. Where do we submit the student certification on the TPR?
Well, it's not out yet, but once it is available, you'll log into the TPR, and there will be essentially a banner or a clickable button to walk you through or access that piece of the submission.
Okay. And I love these live captions. I'm kind of following along those live captions as we go. A funny story on this is I gave a nationwide presentation on our program and some partnerships we do. And when I said I work with the North Dakota Department of Transportation on their work zone safety, it translated as North Korea. So that was kind of so some of the things that are coming in, it's kind of funny when I see that and I'm like, oh man. So TPR apparently is coming across as CPR.
I need to pronounce it a little better clearly.
So how soon can we test for the CDL after we submit the training in the TPR?
Well, that data is live. So once that information is submitted to the TPR, states will have access to it. So in theory, if it's completed on, let's say March 1st, and the applicant also has a test scheduled for March 1st, then the state would be able to go through, verify that it's completed or that it's been uploaded and continue on in the process.
Okay. And then maybe some of your counterparts, we are a 5311, I'll just say, and part of the DOT FTA, but not FMCSA. Do we need to participate in this?
Yeah, I'll take that one because FTA, Federal Transit, is included in the rule. They are not exempt. Josh and I did a webinar for FTA about a month or two ago, and they are subject of getting new CDLs just like everybody else.
Yeah, and real quick, Chris, before going on, I think I dropped in the link, so
I see it.
Should be there. All right.
Yeah, thank you. So that link for the resources are the last two items in the chat. So if you open up those chat, you'll see those last two items. And we'll be sure to have those in our in the information in the presentation, maybe as a supplemental document at the end. So we'll kind of make note of that as well. If a potential driver has a temporary learner's permit, it expires in 180 days. Can they go into the DMV in Utah and get an additional 6 months? Will they require the TPR even though it's not now?
So I think I'm following along. It sounds like, you know, the person has a CLP, but then they're up for renewal either on or before February 7th. They're asking whether or not the individual has to complete ELDT.
Yes.
Is it? Okay.
Yep.
The answer is no, so long as the individual obtains their CDL before that renewed CLP expires.
Okay, thank you.
That's exactly right.
Thanks for chiming in there, Trevor. I'm assuming we were clear on that then.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Oh, let's see. If someone is going for the S&P, do they have to have the theory classroom before obtaining the permit, or do they just fall under the range and road part?
So again, if I'm understanding correctly, just want to make sure we're on the same page here. They're asking whether or not they have to go through theory when wanting to obtain the P&S endorsement, and whether or not there was an element there that I don't know that I followed along with quite clearly enough, but is that in a nutshell the question?
Candy, you want to go ahead and address that? I see she's unmuted, but we don't hear you, Candy. All right, I'll just reread the question. If someone is going for the P&S, do they have to have the theory before obtaining the permit, or do they fall under the range and road part?
Gotcha. So they wouldn't have to complete theory training before obtaining the CLP. I think that's the piece I wasn't quite clear on. But yeah, they could do theory first and then get their CLP and then continue on for behind the wheel. Or they could get their CLP first and then do all of ELDT, the theory and behind the wheel. Regardless, theory and behind the wheel would need to be completed, but that CLP piece is not required before the theory, or, you know, theory is not required before the CLP. But of course, the CLP would be needed for behind the wheel.
Okay.
And I did look up real quick because I have the rule in front of me. There is theory and behind the wheel training for both of those endorsements. It's all in the 2016 rule.
Okay. And then, Richard, I know we addressed this before, but if you want to try to address it again, because I know in your portion of the presentation, you had mentioned something about maintenance forces for snow and ice removal. So if you're an operator for a state agency and you're there for snow removal, would there be limitations on commercial privileges when not operating CMVs for snow and ice removal? That 383.3 D3.
Yeah, that may be one. I know that maybe that's one you could send us, because I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head.
Okay. Rachel, go ahead. I know you wanted to follow up on the P&S for theory. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. No, I wanted to verify. Candy had come to me with that question, and we're going through our yearly CDL audit, and we were instructed that that the theory of their classroom was required for the passenger and school bus to be even obtained on the CLP. So basically, the process was going to be the way it was explained, that they have to come in, get their basic CLP, go get the classroom training for the P&S, come back and do the P&S knowledge testing and add it to their CLP, which seems a little, you know what I mean? I'm not sure if that's the interpretation that's being used or understood.
Gotcha. Thanks for that follow-up. And out of curiosity, who provided that guidance or the?
It was the person doing our CDL audit, the FMCSA representative.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that's fine. And but again, yeah, the theory portion is not required to obtain a CLP, even with the general CLP. So yeah, again, if someone wants to, they can certainly take theory and then go get their CLP and those endorsements. But it's not a requirement of the ELDT regulations. I could go and do the theory portion or get my CLP first and then do the theory and behind the wheel. That's completely acceptable.
Much more efficient, and I'm glad to have that clarification. Thank you.
Yep, of course.
Okay, so as a training provider, do I have to upload my curriculum onto up to the TPR?
I believe the answer to that is no.
Right. Yeah, that's not a requirement.
And then this is the question of the year, maybe not. For the world I work with and support, it is the question of the year, and that is, are there any exceptions for local or state government agencies?
No, I mean, the exceptions in 380 or 383, those ones that exist today were not impacted or changed as a result of ELDT. So there's nothing new in terms of those exceptions. If you're subject to the CDL requirements and you have to go through the skills testing process, things like that, then you're subject to ELDT.
Okay. Conaine, do you want to unmute and ask your questions, or do you want me to continue on? I will continue on. Can students sign up for their road skills test before we submit the certification for the student?
So, Rich, I don't know if you want to take this or I can go first.
Well, my first thought would be that they won't be able to take the skills test if the proof of training isn't at the desk, when they go to the state.
Yeah, and I will say though, there isn't a prohibition in the regulations that says an applicant or a state can't schedule a skills test if ELDT is not there. So the scheduling can still take place, but as Rich mentioned, if ELDT is not completed and the state's unable to verify it, then they can't conduct it. I'll also mention that some states are opting to choose or opting to make ELDT opting to require ELDT prior to scheduling a test. It's not a part of the ELDT regulation, but a state can require ELDT prior to scheduling the skills test. Hopefully that was clear.
Is there a standardized assessment for the theory portion, or does the trainer provider make one up?
Yeah, we get that question a fair amount. There is no standardized assessment for the written part that I talked about. I'm sure there are vendors out in the world who have developed something like that. I'm not going to mention any, or I don't even know of any, but I'm sure somebody's put together something of an assessment for the theory.
Right, and real quick on that note, there's the regulations don't specify any number of questions required on the assessment. It's just that, the trainees be assessed, and it has to include all of the units of instructions included in the appendices.
Okay. What kind of cost is involved in the ELDT? I'm getting a lot of questions from applicants for this required training, and will there be a set price, or is it up to each individual TPR?
I'll start with that, Josh. That question comes up a lot. There is no set cost. As I mentioned, we did have to do a cost-benefit analysis when we did the rule initially, but tuitions and things like that are all over the board. So we didn't really put a lot, into that in the rule, other than, we have to balance the cost of the rule versus the benefits of the rule. That we had to do. So, but we don't get into the individual of what this is going to individual stories of what this is going to cost to train and that kind of thing.
Right. And I want to say, Rich, and correct me if I'm wrong, as a part of the information that we do collect, we ask an average amount because, like Rich said, they're kind of all over the board. Training providers can set the cost, but when a training provider registers, we ask how, essentially an average cost for the course.
And Josh, thanks for that reminder. You're absolutely right. We do ask for that information when people register to get on the TPR.
I am, there's a couple more questions. So if any others are coming in, please, again, keep your questions coming in. We will address them. But I recently attended a regional meeting, and it was the subcommittee on maintenance. And the hot topic, of course, was the ELDT and the requirements and the changes that are being made. And one of the conversation topics that was, again, one of those hot topics was, I would almost dare to say that, it's one of those refusal of changes, but everybody asking about, again, the exemption. So if I were working for a state agency and I wanted to find out what the exact requirements are for snow and ice operations, who and where would I go to find that information?
If they were looking for specific state information, you're saying? State requirements?
I would say the actual federal requirements. So again, I think this is maybe one of those questions as far as are there truly any exemptions? And I think we've heard the answer is no, but there's that maybe that thought process. Emergency operations, snow and ice kind of falls under that umbrella sometimes. So where do you go to find that exact interpretation of that resource?
Those are all in our regulations in Part 383. I believe I mentioned. I'm going back to my notes, C, D, and H in 383.3 of the federal regulations. As Josh said, those have not been changed. If you're exempt by that, you're exempt from ELDT.
Okay.
Yeah, and some of those are permissive regulations. So you would want to also ensure that the state, if they are waiving skills tests based upon those exemptions or exceptions, you would want to confirm with them that they truly are, because again, they are permissive.
I would suggest probably checking with your general counsel in your area or maybe with your agency to ensure that you're staying in compliance. Again, you wouldn't want something to happen and not be covered.
Right, and also in Part 380, specifically 386.03, it talks about applicability. And A1 through 4 speaks to what Rich mentioned, drivers accepted from the CDL requirements under 383C, D, and H, as well as drivers applying for restricted CDLs under 383.3 and E through G. So those are, you'll want to also use that as a reference.
And Rich, I think you mentioned earlier, if they already have their CDL, then that's the answer. They're good to go. It's just those coming in that need a new one, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, even if they had one 10 years ago and it expired, they're not subject to this rule.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to shift gears, and in the school bus world, we have someone interested in obtaining their CDL, getting their bus endorsement. Is there a step-by-step kind of checklist for going through this process to give them?
I don't know if there's a step-by-step checklist, unless that's something you guys have put together, Josh. I don't know.
Right. So we do have an ELDT applicability flow chart in the works, and it will be released pretty soon here. And we are also looking at exactly this, basically a flow chart that walks through the process or the steps a driver takes in order to get either the school bus or the passenger endorsement or even just their general CDL. So that is in the works. It's a great suggestion, and we'll be adding that to our website once it's finalized. So again, sign up for those emails and you'll get notification once that's added.
And I would say this will probably lead us into our next question here, but I would also say that I think, Rich, you had mentioned it, maybe Josh, you mentioned it prior to handing it off, but the federal is the standard. The states can go above and beyond that, but the federal is the minimum standard. So make sure you guys are complying with that. So with that being said, where do I go to find the registered trainers in my area?
So the list of training providers that are on the TPR is not available yet. So you won't be able to go to the TPR website today to access that. It will be releasing that function or the search function to where you can access the training providers on the TPR closer to the implementation date. If that date changes or anything like that, we'll certainly make you all aware or sign up for those emails.
Do each of the individual TPRs have to register their own instructors, or is that individual based?
They do not have to register the instructors, but the instructors have to meet the qualifications in the rule.
Right. Yeah. So to add on to that, if Rich is a training provider and I'm one of his instructors, Rich would register as a training provider to be listed on the TPR. And then he would basically just invite me as a user to his account. So then that way I can go in and add the training location or submit the ELDT certification information. But the individual instructor doesn't have to register.
As a training provider, do I have to have my CDL, and do I have to have it for a minimum period of time?
If they are an instructor, I believe they have to have the CDL for 2 years as either a theory or behind the wheel trainer.
Right. Yeah, and basically has to have a CDL of the same or higher class necessary to operate the CMV for the training. And as Rich mentioned, at least 2 years of experience driving a CMV or 2 years of experience as a behind the wheel CMV instructor for the behind the wheel instructor requirements.
Exactly right.
All right, there's a next question that is one of those overlap questions. So would it be correct in stating that the individual gets a permit before February 7/22 and then after February 7/22, while still on that initial permit, they want to take the written test for hazmat? Would they be required to take the training for hazmat because the permit was issued before 2/7/22? We do not have to have the hazmat on a permit. Okay, we do not
Right.
put hazmat on a permit. Okay.
Yeah, the hazmat's not on the permit, but basically the easy way to look at that is, did the individual have the hazmat endorsement prior to the compliance date? If no, and they're wanting to obtain it, then they're subject to ELDT.
All right. Any other questions? I think I got through them all.
Nice.
If I missed anybody's questions, I apologize. Please go ahead and feel free to either pop it back in or unmute and ask your question.
And I know, Chris, you or Brenda will be sending me the ones we didn't get to or couldn't answer.
Yes.
We will get to those. Yeah, and I'll just also offer, if there's any other that you think of after the webinar, I would say don't hesitate. Either reach out to us or I don't know if you want to filter it through Chris and Brenda, but feel free.
All right. Well, as we, okay, did you see there's a question that just popped in? Okay, hold on. So in that previous hazmat question, the individual will need to take the written hazmat test prior to 2/7/22 before they fall under the ELDT. Yes. So yes.
Right. Yep.
Okay. All right. All right, everyone. Again, just as a little reminder, I am putting the sign-in sheet.
Looks like a couple more are coming in.
Yeah, which is great. It's all right. So again, the sign-in sheet. So if you have people who are sitting and participated with you today, they will need to complete that sign-in sheet. I'm going to pop that into the chat here in just a second. So please click that and fill it out and then return it to the information on the bottom. In addition to that, there will be an evaluation link. So if you wouldn't mind giving us some feedback on today's information handoff, we would certainly appreciate that. And that'll be in the chat here as well. So before we continue to close out, let's just kind of address these last couple questions. So the instructors after February 7th, do they have to have a hazmat endorsement to teach the hazmat classroom?
Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes, okay.
although, you know, there is no behind the wheel for hazmat, there's a theory element, and those theory instructors have similar requirements. They have to have a CDL of the same or higher class and all endorsements necessary. So yeah, they'll have to have that, and at least for 2 years.
Okay. What steps or qualifications are required for a trucking company to certify their own in-house instructor? Sorry if this was missed previously.
Once again, I don't believe, Chris, they have to certify them. They just have to make sure they're meeting what, as Josh has mentioned, what it is defined in the rule as a theory and behind the wheel instructor.
All right. And then there was just a comment on pricing. And to me, that just maybe there needs to be more in the area to help a little bit of some competition. So
I know some that are they may just do it for free. I don't know.
You see that question, Josh?
Only partially, yeah.
Okay. Would we be correct in stating the individual gets a Class B permit before February 7th? After February 7th, they want a Class A permit. They would then be required to meet the ELDT training requirements as the initial issuance was not a Class A.
Correct.
Because
Yeah.
they're seeking an upgrade. The answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Brenda, do you want to close us out, and then I'll finish closing us off?
Sounds good. And obviously, if anyone thinks of any additional questions, feel free to keep them coming. We got a little bit more time left, but thanks again, Josh and Rich, for your presentation discussion today, just taking the time to answer all these questions. I think I already got a few comments that it's been very helpful, just helping to clarify a lot of this information that's out there. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar is part of our Commercial Vehicle Safety Center, and you will be able to view the slides and reporting from this webinar. We'll get that up there as soon as we can, probably within the next few days. There's also recordings from past webinars if you want to take a look at those as well. And I did just post that link once again in the chat box. And just another goal of our center is to provide resources and assistance to help establish partnerships between agencies, industry, universities to improve CMV safety. So if you're interested in forming a partnership or would like any other information or assistance, reference our website or feel free to reach out and contact me directly. And in addition, I am pleased to announce that we will be hosting another Commercial Vehicle Safety Summit for the FMCSA Western Region states late next year in downtown Denver. And the focus of that summit is going to be to share information and best practices to reduce distracted driving, both by CMV drivers as well as others operating around CMVs, and to look at how to improve safety in work zones as well. So be looking out for further information about that summit. It'll be on our website again and also distributed via email. And finally, just a quick reminder, as Chris mentioned, he put that link in the chat box. If you have the opportunity to complete that short evaluation survey, that would be great. Provide your feedback, suggestions you might have for possible future topics. And just thanks again for your attendance today. And I'll turn it back over to you, Chris. Did one more question couple more questions come in?
Yeah, so it's basically my hazmat expired, but I have over 2 years. Do I still qualify? If my hazmat expired, I have over 2 years, do I still qualify? So,
I guess he's asking if he qualifies as an instructor.
Maybe, yes.
Yeah, I believe
good.
Rich, yeah, I was going to say, I believe the answer would be yes. I don't think, if it's expired, that would affect it like it does if your CDL was canceled or suspended for a reason under 38351. But I think that is one we should follow up with offline just to ensure.
Okay. Dale, did you want to clarify? You unmuted, so I didn't know if you wanted to clarify anything. Yeah. Are we good?
Yes, that was the question. It just expired. I missed a 5-year background, And so I just got to get it renewed and do a new background. So I'd still qualify.
Right. Yeah, I do believe that's the case. But again, we'll confirm that in a follow-up.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And then as far as the recording, like Brenda had just mentioned, it will be made available on the Commercial Vehicle Safety Center's website, and she has that link in the chat. We will make sure again that that we will have the recording out there, and the materials, the presentation materials will be made available. And then Rich and Josh will receive the questions from today, and so if there's any they need to follow up with, they will follow up with you directly to make sure that your questions are answered in the order that you wish them to be answered, so, or in the length that you wish them to be answered. So I sincerely hope you enjoyed and gained some new insight from today's session. I do encourage you guys to visit our website at ugpti.org, where you'll find some more information on the Transportation Learning Network, or TLN, and the Commercial Vehicle Safety Center, where you will again find access to this recording. Just give it a couple days for it to be posted out there. With that, Rich, thank you so very much. Josh, thank you. Brenda, thank you again as well. Everybody else, thank you for your time and attention. Get out there and don't forget to be awesome. Have a great day, guys.